Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Today, I want to round out my series on pregnancy then and now by taking a look at how advice about infant care in the early modern period might compare with contemporary recommendations. But before we start this, as I am going to be making reference to modern infant care advice, I do feel that it's absolutely vital that I add the following caveat right at the start of this video. At the time of making this, I have a 4-year-old and a 6-week-old. I'm in the UK and it is late 2024. So I am following NHS advice as it stands at this point. This video is in no way intended to act as advice for safe infant care. I do not have the expertise to offer that kind of information to you. Please check with your healthcare provider to ensure that you are getting the safest, most well-informed and up-to-date advice when it comes to your baby. I am only 4 years between babies, and either I forgot things due to sleep deprivation or some of the advice has already changed because stuff I'm doing seems to be new to me. So with a gap of 500 years, I'm wondering if that sense of change is going to be even more pronounced. Well, there's a way to find out. Let's check it out. In a previous video that can be found in this series or playlist, I discussed the first book on pregnancy, birth and child rearing to be published in English, known as The Birth of Mankind or The Woman's Book, and I will be making reference to the advice found in that text during this video too. Immediately after birth, the very first instruction with regard to caring for the infant that's found in the text is for the cutting of the umbilical cord. Quote, "By and by, the navel must be cut 3 fingers' breadth from the belly, and so knit by, meaning tied off, and let be strewed on the head of that remaineth of the powder of Bol Armenianac." This was a type of clay that was used as an astringent, so presumably it would have been seen as being useful for closing down the vessels in the umbilical stump that might bleed. And sanguis draconis. This was a gum resin taken from the berries of palm trees, commonly used to treat respiratory and gastrointestinal ailments. Sarcola, also known as the Persian gum plant. This produces a balsam that was used for the treatment of wounds. Myrrh, a resin that might prevent infection and reduce pain. And cumin. Once these powders had been successfully applied to the umbilical stump, the reader is informed that that stump should then be covered with wool that had been dipped in olive oil to stop all of those powders from falling off. In our case, my husband was handed some scissors, shown where to cut, and I was promptly handed a baby with a little white plastic clip on the end of a roughly inch-long stump. There would be no powders or oil-covered wool, quite the opposite in fact. We were advised to keep the umbilical stump uncovered and dry as much as possible while we waited for it to drop off naturally. In the early modern period, it was advised after the cutting and knitting of this cord to, quote, "anoint all the child's body with the oil of acorns. After this anointing, wash the infant with warm water. Then the infant's nostrils should be opened and cleaned. The, quote, child's nurse should sit the baby up so, quote, that it may be provoked to purge the belly," by which I assume they meant to encourage the baby to take their first poo. This provoking was viewed as a way of offering protection from potential humoral imbalance that might occur through the baby becoming too hot or too cold. Now, knowing how it presents itself, I can see why they might have viewed this first bowel movement as something a little suspect, shall we say. Something that they wanted to get out of the way as soon as possible. I mean, after all, modern parents are usually warned about the appearance of meconium, as if unprepared, a new parent might be somewhat disconcerted by their very fresh infant excreting something that resembles greenish black tar. 3 to 4 days after the birth, the early modern caregiver was told to expect the, quote, knot of the navel to fall off. Once this occurred, they were advised to powder the remaining belly button, still possibly not completely healed, with the ashes of a burnt calf's hoof or snail shells, or, quote, the powder of lead called red lead tempered with wine. Now, while all of these do sound fairly suspect in terms of their health benefits and, frankly, their potential to introduce infection, I do think the lead recommendation takes it to another level. I can't think of anything that comes close to being a parallel for this in contemporary infant care advice. Today, the umbilical stump is very much a look with your eyes, not with your hands kind of situation for those who are dealing with newborns. It was recommended to regularly wipe a baby's eyes with linen or silk. Their cradle should be situated in such a way that it avoided both sun and moonbeams from falling upon the baby. The baby should be washed 2 or 3 times a day after sleeping, in hot water during winter and in lukewarm water in summer. After bathing, the baby should be gently wiped and dried using warmed linen cloths. Their caregiver should then lay the baby across their lap on its front, and in that position, seemingly massage the baby. After this, the baby should be swaddled and returned to their cradle. When it came to swaddling for the early modern baby, according to the Birth of Mankind, quote, the nurse must give all diligence and heed that she bind every part right, and in his due place and order. For in this is it, as it is in young and tender vines, plants and twigs, the which, even as you bow them in their youth, so they will evermore remain unto age. And even so the infant, if it be bound and swaddled, the members lying right and straight, then it shall grow straight and upright. If it be crookedly handled, it will grow likewise. While swaddling is not as ubiquitous as it once was, it is certainly something that's very popular and is still practiced today, albeit with some very clear recommendations to make that practice as safe as possible. There are risks that are attached. Caregivers are, for example, reminded to ensure that the baby will not become too hot while they are swaddled. It is advised that a baby is not swaddled if they happen to be unwell and have a fever. Once a baby starts to, or seems to be close to rolling, it is advised that their arms are no longer swaddled in. It is also important that the swaddle is secured sufficiently to make sure that it will not be able to become loose enough to cover the baby's face. But with all these risks involved, the question might be, why swaddle a baby at all today? It is suggested that swaddling might be beneficial to help soothe babies to sleep, as the experience mimics their life in the womb. It's also thought that it might help them to stay asleep longer, as by having their arms strapped to their bodies, it limits the effect of the startle reflex that has been known to wake babies up. Of course, there is no known relationship between a swaddled baby and a child growing up to be a, quote, straight and upright adult. Modern swaddles tend to be single pieces of fabric folded into a triangle and then wrapped in the way that is shown in this image from the Lullaby Trust website. I think I must either lack the, origami skills to achieve this, or perhaps both my babies were simply too Houdini-like to be actually contained. But we did get on with a zip-up kind of swaddle, which looks a little bit like a sleeping bag. Early modern babies, as shown in the portraits on screen, appear to be swaddled slightly differently than babies are today. Rather than a single triangle of folded fabric to create something like a baby burrito, the early modern baby was wrapped in swaddling bands to give more of an appearance of being bandaged up. The Victorian Albert's collection includes an Italian white linen swaddling band that's trimmed with whitework and dates to 1590 to 1600. A blog post on the V&A's website, which features an image of this swaddling band, explains that, quote, there was also much concern that babies were more vulnerable to the cold, and carers would dress the child with a plethora of layers. These layers included a rectangular-shaped clout or napkin, nappy. The nappy would be folded in two, and inside they would put a bed of sphagnum moss or soft rags to absorb the waste, which could then be rinsed out and reused. There would be a belly band or a binder, which was a strip of linen cloth which would be wrapped around the baby's stomach to support the abdomen and protect the belly button. On top of that would be a front or back opening linen shirt. On the baby's head would be a triangular shaped cloth and 1 or 2 caps. The first cap was usually rather plain, with the second one being rather more decorative. Then a bed, which was a rectangular shaped cloth with pleats at the top, would be wrapped around the baby and folded over its feet. This would effectively make a tidy bundle of the baby and hold down its limbs. Over this, a 3-metre long swaddle band, a band of linen, would be wrapped or swaddled around the child in a variety of diagonal or herringbone patterns. A bib could then be added on top. The last layer was a stay band, whose function was to keep the head stable. This band was placed under the cap and pinned to the clothes at shoulder level. I can only imagine how long it would have taken to get an infant in and out of all these layers. Presumably, changing the napkin and bathing the baby is going to necessitate a full undress and redress, but apart from that, I'm assuming the baby is just going to be set up like this. And thus I'm guessing there is probably not going to be any tummy time being done, which I'm fairly sure would utterly scandalise my health visitor. As the early modern baby reached an age where its mobility was expected to increase, the swaddling would gradually be set aside to allow that baby to crawl and then finally walk. But what of feeding? Just as today, the recommendations when it came to feeding an infant highlighted the value of breastfeeding. The early modern advice in this regard stated that, quote, "It shall be best that the mother give her child suck of herself, for the mother's milk is more convenient and agreeable to the infant than any other woman's. And more doth it nourish it. For because that in the mother's belly it was wont to the same, and fed with it, and therefore also it doth more desirously covet the same, as the which it is best acquainted." Early modern mothers were, however, warned about the risk of overfeeding their babies at their breasts, in case these infants were unable to digest all this milk that could potentially raise their humours and make them unwell. The idea of overfeeding a baby, particularly a breastfed baby, is one that is not supported in modern medical advice. Nicholas Orme points out that, quote, "Maternal breastfeeding was recommended by educational writers too, by Juan Luis Vives, the Spanish scholar influential in England in 1529, and Sir Thomas Eliot in the following year. In 1553, Thomas Cranmer tried to make the practice official in a new code of church law submitted to Parliament. Pronouncing it to be the natural order of things, he criticised those women who deputed it to others through a kind of lax indulgence towards their own bodies. The code was never sanctioned, however, so the practice remained unregulated. If mothers were unwilling or indeed unable to nurse their own infants, they thus remained free of official censure. The other option for mother's milk in the early modern period was the milk of a wet nurse. A good wet nurse, we are told, would, quote, "be of good colour and complexion. She should be buxom. She should have given birth at least 2 months previously, preferably to a boy. She should not be too fat nor too thin. She should be honest, cheerful, humble and calm. Her behaviour should not be, quote, light or wanton, and she must, of course, also produce sufficient milk. That milk should in turn be checked to ensure, quote, that it be not blackish, bluish, grey or reddish, neither sour, sharp, saltish or brackish, not too thin or too thick, quote, but temperately white and pleasant in taste." There was also extensive advice in regards to dealing with a drop in milk supply. This included, but was not limited to, consuming parsnips and or fennel in a broth of barley, eating sheep's breasts, massaging the breastfeeder's breasts, drinking a broth containing powdered crystal, and staying away from, quote, venery or men's company. While the early modern child might suck at the breast for 2 years, 1 year was apparently the most common. Weaning, whenever it did occur, should be done slowly, little by little, we are told. The infant should be given, quote, little pills of bread and sugar to eat, so that it might become accustomed to solids, which could be added in as time went on. When we look at contemporary advice, however, whether that relates to baby-led weaning or the giving of purees or whatever else, that advice states it's best to avoid giving added sugar in a baby's diet until at least 2 years old, while some resources advise waiting until the child is 4. In addition to caring for a baby's physical needs, early modern parents, like many of their counterparts across the centuries right on through to today, were deeply concerned about the spiritual well-being and preservation of their young people's immortal souls. Baptism was a requirement for burial in consecrated ground, in addition to being viewed as the only way to, quote, enter the kingdom of God. Thus it was that within just a few days of their birth, the early modern baby would be promptly taken to their parents' church and baptised. So vital was baptism viewed as being that, in extremis, when dealing with a baby that was perhaps born sickly and thought unlikely to live, the church themselves advised and permitted that a midwife or the parents of that baby should baptise the child themselves. In making this video, I am heavily indebted to Nicholas Orme's fabulous book, Tudor Children. In the preface to that book, he points out that he believes it to be, quote, the first general study of childhood in Tudor England. This fascinating exploration of Tudor childhood also includes the most gorgeous, full-colour, high-resolution illustrations. I will be putting a link to this book in the description box of this video. If you already have it, or if you choose to get it, do let me know what you think of it. But returning briefly to the sad subject of early modern infant mortality. On this, I want to add Orme's words now, quote, not all those born would survive. It has been estimated that towards the end of the 16th century, about 17% of babies died in the first year of life. It was once supposed that the high proportion of deaths in childhood would have made parents less concerned about their children, and less loving and empathetic. Parents in Tudor England often had different ideas about children's development and discipline from those of today, but there is no reason to think that most of them lacked love for their children, or failed to grieve at illness or at death. While I'm sure in some cases that old saying, the past is another country, they do things differently there, may have some validity, for me, child rearing is not one of those cases. Because I believe that precious little has changed in the core concerns of people throughout recorded history, and perhaps even beyond that. When people have children, in most cases, I believe that core concern will be and would have been ensuring as far as possible that those children are fed, warm, safe, and, if possible, happy. Whether you are raising children in 1524 or 2024, you hopefully are just trying your best. And to do that, you're going to listen to the advice of the experts of your age, however different that might be, and you're going to attempt to follow it. So what do you think of the infant care advice we have looked at today? If any of you are the parents of adult children, are you aware of change recommendations from when you were looking after your newborns? Do any of your adult children have newborns of their own? Have they been told they must do things differently to how you were told to do them? Could you perhaps give us some examples? As always, I'm looking forward to your conversations in the comments section underneath this video. I'd also love it if you could pop an emoji, or a social glyph as we are now calling them, in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement, and the more engaged video gets, the more YouTube claims they share it out, and that will, apparently, help us to grow our community. I think it's only appropriate that we pick an emoji that is baby related, so perhaps a little baby, maybe a baby's toy, if there's a crib, something like that. I look forward to seeing what you pick. You can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the place you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. If you like my channel, let some pals know about it. You can tell me you like this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, have a check now just to make sure you have not been mysteriously unsubscribed against your will. While you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear, and that way YouTube claim they will tell you when I'm next uploaded and also when I am next planned to go live, which will be hopefully very soon. We're just working out some timings with the newborn, etc. And when I do go live, I'll be talking about the history news, so I know you're not going to want to miss that. We have, of course, got our failsafe. Head to my website. It is www.katrinamarchant.com. If you go to the contact page of that website, you'll see a box. Put your email address in that box, hit submit, and that will add you to my list so that I can send you out a message once a week to let you know what I've been up to, but also to send you useful links for my content for the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.